Welcome. The topic for today is Shabbos preparations for warm food. What can we do before Shabbos to make sure that we have hot food on Shabbos? We know that one of the restricted activities on Shabbos is to cook. So how can we have hot food on Shabbos? The Zohar tells us that Shabbos is a day of the soul, Yom HaDinishmasa. It's a special day where the soul can experience a connection to God unlike any of the other days of the week. At the same time, we're also told from the prophets that the body also has to have enjoyment. In order to have the full experience of the soul, the body also has to be included. And you shall add pleasure to the day of Shabbos. There must be physical pleasure as well. So on one hand, Shabbos is a day of the soul. On the other hand, the body has to have physical pleasure. And now we have what seems to be a paradox. It's a seeming contradiction. We want to do whatever the soul needs, but at the same time, we want to do what the body needs. How can we do that? When it comes to cooking, for example, the Torah tells us we're not supposed to cook. We're not supposed to, according to that, have fresh, hot food on Shabbos. On the other hand, how's the body going to be very happy if it goes the whole day just eating cold food? So this is a sort of paradox. How do we satisfy both soul and body together? The Talmud tells us that long ago there was a group who denied the authority of the oral law. The oral law is what tells us how to apply the Torah laws without changing the Torah laws at all. It guides us how to apply the Torah laws in our situation in the most balanced way. The Karaites denied the oral law. They saw what it says in the Torah. God says in the Torah, Lo sevaru eish, you should not burn any fire, b'chol mush v'seichem, in any of your dwellings, b'yom Shabbos. Do not burn any fire in any of your dwellings on the day of Shabbos, and they would not have any fire burning. They wouldn't leave fire burning for lights from before Shabbos. They wouldn't leave any fire burning to warm up food. And they would go the whole day of Shabbos just eating only cold food. The rabbis in the Talmud strongly opposed this approach. They understood that God's intent in the Torah is that we should fulfill the mitzvahs in a balanced way, without taking away from any aspect of the prohibited acts that God ordained. It would still be possible to have hot food on Shabbos. And so therefore, they instructed all Jewish people to try their best, despite the restriction to cook on Shabbos, to have hot food on Shabbos. The Ramah, the great halachic authority who lived about 400 years ago, writes in Siman 257 in Orach Chaim, U'mitzvah lahat min l'Shabbos. It's a special act, a mitzvah, to put away food insulated on Shabbos, k'dei sheyochel chamen b'Shabbos, in order that a person should have some sort of hot food on Shabbos. Ki zehu mikoved v'oinik Shabbos. This is what adds respect. It would adds pleasure to the Shabbos. If we want to have pleasure on Shabbos, we need to have hot food. But it goes deeper than that. Because really what we're trying to show is the completeness of Torah. That the Torah on one hand can instruct us to have a totally restricted act. And even though we're not allowed to cook, we're not allowed to ignite a fire, we're not allowed to turn on a fire on Shabbos, Jewish people throughout the generations have still made sure to have warm, heated food every Shabbos. And so therefore, a lot of the preparations on Erev Shabbos revolve around what can we do in order to have warm food on Shabbos. What we try to do in this study time together is to try and clarify what it is that we need to do practically to fulfill the halacha. A lot of times the halacha is confusing. There are many variations in different cases. There are many scenarios that come up. It's hard to remember. Some people learn halacha, they see there's a difference of opinion. One person says this, one person says that. They don't know who to follow. So what we wanted to try during this study time together is to reach clarity on what we need to do practically. And therefore, it's not our agenda at this time to go through the different scenarios, the different variations. And of course, if there are varying scenarios, each person would have to then verify on their own what they need to do. But we wanted to go over certain general acts that are practiced by almost every Jewish family in the world before Shabbos in order to ensure that they have hot food for Shabbos. So the first point for today is that whenever you want to put away food to remain warm for the entire Shabbos, so you're going to have to leave a fire burning, and you're going to have to put the pot of food on the fire from before Shabbos. But this is the thing. The first point is, make sure that the food that you're putting away for Shabbos is fully cooked already before Shabbos. The food that we put away to be used on Shabbos needs to be fully cooked. Now that doesn't mean that it has to be made just a few minutes before Shabbos. You can make it during the week. Today it can be refrigerated, frozen even. And then when it comes a few hours before Shabbos, take it out, reheat it so that it will reach its heated form, and then take the pot and get it ready for putting away, for putting on the fire for Shabbos. The food that we put on the fire to be held for Shabbos should be fully cooked. The second point for today is that when you turn on the fire and we put the pot on the fire, it becomes a question afterwards, rabbinically, if we remove the pot on Shabbos to take out some food, whether we could put it back. You want, for example, to have hot food on Shabbos morning. You put the pot on Friday afternoon before Shabbos comes in. That night, Friday night, someone wants to eat a little bit of that delicacy, a little bit of that food. You take the pot off the fire, you serve from it, and now you have a question, but I need it for tomorrow. I need to put it back on the fire. Can I put it back? And here's the rule. The pot would not be able to be put back unless the fire is totally covered. The reason for this is because the Sanhedrin were concerned that if a person would take off the pot and then put it back and the fire would totally open, if he would see that the pot wasn't completely cooked or it needed a higher temperature, he might adjust the fire. In the times of the Sanhedrin, it meant stroking the actual fire, moving the coals. Nowadays, it would mean simply just turning the setting on the stove. In order not to come to that, the Sanhedrin ordained that the fire be covered. So therefore, the second point that we're learning today is when you take food that you want to hold hot for Shabbos and you put it on the fire, that it should remain warm, the fire needs to be covered in order to be able to put back the pot. How do you cover the fire? So, generally, it's possible to take any type of non-flammable material, make it into a flat plane that can cover the whole surface area of the fire, and we also try to cover the adjustments, the knobs on the stove area with the covering. This is in order that we don't come to adjust the fire by accident. These type of materials, whether it be aluminums, different types of aluminums, or tin, are possible to find today in many Jewish communities, and the customary name for them is a blech. If you go to in a hardware store in a populated Jewish community, you'll generally be able to find this covering, special covering for the fire for Shabbos. We put down the blech before Shabbos on the open fires. We cover the open fires and the knobs, and then afterwards we could take the pot and put that on top of the blech. So, again, the second point is, once your food is fully cooked, now it's right before Shabbos. You want to put it on the flame, so you light the flame, usually to a low setting, because you only want it to stay warm for all of Shabbos. You don't want it to burn. You turn on the flame to a warm setting. Afterwards, you put on the blech covering, and on top of that, you put on the pot of food. So that would be the second necessary preparation for having warm food on Shabbos. The third point we wanted to go over is an alternate way of doing this. Is nowadays we have hot plates, crock pots. There are many appliances available to us that do all the warming activity electronically. If a person owns a hot plate that has no settings on it, or a crock pot without any ability to adjust the temperature, it would be possible to put the food on even without any covering. Remember, the point of the covering is that we shouldn't come to become confused, and afterwards, when putting back something, to try and adjust the temperature. If it's not possible to adjust the temperature, it's fine. It doesn't have to be covered. So when using a hot plate or crock pot without any adjustments, it would not be necessary to cover them with an additional covering. We can put the pot directly onto those elements. The next point that we wanted to go over for today is warming up water. It's important to have hot water. Sometimes, if a person is, for example, not feeling well, and they can't eat the hot food on Shabbos, but they want to fulfill the idea of having hot food on Shabbos, like the Ramah says, it'll be enough to drink something hot on the day of Shabbos. But you need hot water in order to do that. So customarily, Jewish families throughout the world warm up hot water before Shabbos and leave it in a warming situation. The way that this is usually done today is through a hot water urn. Hot water urn is generally activated electronically, and it keeps the water warm for all of Shabbos. But here's what we need to remember in terms of preparations. Number one is the water should already be fully cooked before Shabbos in order to put it up for Shabbos. Just like we said about food, it should be fully cooked. The water should already have reached 160 degrees Fahrenheit. The water should be cooked before putting it up in the hot water urn for Shabbos. Number one. Number two is that assuming that there are adjustments on the hot water urn, they need to be taped. The knob on the hot water urn needs to be taped so that we don't come inadvertently to change the adjustments on Shabbos. If there are other automatic electronic functions on the hot water urn, it would be necessary to disable them before Shabbos. For example, many urns have an automatic pouring system. It would be necessary to disable that before Shabbos because we wouldn't be able to use the electronic components of the urn on Shabbos. There are many urns that are manufactured today that come with a specific Shabbos mode, that a person can push one switch and turn the urn into its Shabbos mode. So, once again, we'll go over the points that we learned today. In order to have warm food on Shabbos, the preparations that would be necessary before Shabbos are, number one, make sure that whatever food you're putting up is already cooked fully. Number two, make sure that the element of fire that you use to keep the pot of food warm be covered with some sort of material that covers the fire and the knobs. Number three, you can use a hot plate or crock pot to keep the food warm. If they have no adjustments, it doesn't have to be covered with any additional covering. Number four, we try to warm up water before Shabbos in the hot water urn. We'll make sure already before Shabbos that any knobs or adjustments on the hot water urn are covered, or that the automatic electronic functions are disabled. There is another technical point in regard to putting up food to warm on Shabbos, and that is that the Sanhedrin understood that if a person would totally insulate their pot on Shabbos, it would once again bring them to desiring to make adjustments in the fire. And so therefore, when we have a pot before Shabbos, if it's just a pot that's being put on the fire, it's not a problem. But if the pot is covered afterwards with any insulating material, either it's covered totally with a towel or it's covered totally with silver foil and the like, it would be wrong. It would be restricted to put that pot with its insulated covering on the fire, even though it's being put on before Shabbos. The way to solve this issue technically is make sure that the entire pot is not totally covered. For example, if you have a towel covering a pot, so then you open it up a little on one spot, so it shouldn't be total coverage. If you have a pot being covered by silver foil, you leave a spot that's open, so it shouldn't be total coverage. If we're able to do these preparations before Shabbos, and we make sure to try and have warm food available to us every Shabbos, in a certain way, we actually reveal the completeness of Torah. Whereas other people might look at the Torah and they'll say, look how hard it is. You have to keep all these restrictions, you have to keep all these prohibitions. You can't really enjoy yourself on Shabbos. We testify that it is possible to keep the Shabbos to all of its details, with all of its restrictions, and nonetheless have full amount of pleasure on Shabbos. What we try to do, through following all the restrictions, is to put up food in the proper way so that we'll be able to benefit and have the greatest level of pleasure on Shabbos. May God help, and we'll be able to prepare ourselves for each and every Shabbos so that we'll be able to show to ourselves and to everyone around the eternity of Torah, the balanced way of application of Torah that relates to all of our experiences in body and soul together.